Good morning. My name is Stephen Farris. This tape has been prepared for the people of Toronto Chinese Presbyterian Church, but I know that the members of the church would want me also to welcome anybody else who comes across this service of worship. May it be a blessing to you. Our reading for the day is taken from the first book of Samuel, chapter 7, beginning to read at verse 5. 1 Samuel chapter 7, verse 5. Then Samuel the judge said, "Gather all Israel at Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you." So they gathered at Mizpah and drew water and poured it out before the Lord. They fasted that day and said, "We have sinned against the Lord." And Samuel judged the people of Israel at Mizpah. When the Philistines heard that the people of Israel had gathered at Mizpah, the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel. And when the people of Israel heard of it, they were afraid of the Philistines. The people of Israel said to Samuel, "Do not cease to cry out to the Lord our God for us, and pray that he may save us from the hand of the Philistines." So Samuel took a whole sucking lamb and offered it as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. Samuel cried out to the Lord for Israel, and the Lord answered him. As Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to attack Israel, but the Lord thundered with a mighty voice that day against the Philistines and threw them into confusion, and they were routed before Israel. And the men of Israel went out of Mizpah and pursued the Philistines and struck them down as far as beyond Bethkar. Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Jesherah, and named it Ebenezer. For he said, "Thus far the Lord has helped us." So the Philistines were subdued and did not again enter the territory of Israel. The hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. The towns that the Philistines had taken from Israel were restored to Israel from Ekron to Gath, and Israel recovered their territory from the hands of the Philistines. And there was peace also between Israel and the Amorites. This is the word of the Lord, and thanks be to God. Well, this past summer, when it was safe to go out and visit family, Patty and I went to visit our son and his family here in Toronto. And while we were there, my daughter-in-law turned to my 2-year-old grandson, Idris, and said, "Idris, show your Opa the stones." So Idris took me by the hand, took me outside, and showed me at the end of their driveway there was a pile of stones. They were painted. They were painted of memories of good things that had happened, memories of people that loved Idris. Idris and his mother had painted them together. Now, to be honest, to understand what was on the stones, I needed Idris' help to understand. But it turned out that their driveway was not the only place there were stones in the neighborhood. Somebody had been going around the neighborhood at night and leaving stones beside the road, beside the driveways of many of the houses in the community. And they were painted in different ways, some of them with happy faces, smiling faces. Some of them with only the simple words, "Thank you. Thank you." And that memory reminded me of a story I hadn't thought about for years in the First Testament, in the book of Samuel. Now, it used to be a very, very popular story. For example, people used to name their sons after the central detail in the story. They called their little boys Ebenezer. But I think Charles Dickens, in his wonderful story, A Christmas Carol, and his magnificent creation, Ebenezer Scrooge, have probably done that in. I don't think anybody is going to call their newborn son Ebenezer for quite some time now. And I also know that it was very popular preaching material in the old days. But I have to admit, until I wrote this sermon, I never had preached on this passage. It's been all but forgotten. The story of Ebenezer, of the stone of help. Because that's what the word means. Eben ha-etzer in Hebrew. Ebenezer, the stone of help. Well, the background of the story is this. The Israelites were in trouble because they were always losing in battle to the Philistines. Unless they had some kind of superhero on their side, somebody like Samson with huge and enormous strength, they almost always lost the battles to the Philistines. There was a good technological reason for this, by the way. To be quite blunt about it, the Philistines were more advanced than the Israelites. Interestingly enough, the Philistines themselves were probably refugees. They had come from Kaftor. Modern scholars think that Kaftor was an ancient name for the island of Crete, and there are all kinds of interesting speculations about why the Philistines left Crete and settled on the coastline of what is now the state of Israel. But they did so, and they brought technology with them. They were city dwellers in their cities along the coastline, while the Israelites were up in the hills. Probably, my guess is, the Philistines called the Israelites whatever was the ancient equivalent of hillbillies. Now, I lived for a year in West Virginia, and I know that people hate that name, hillbillies. But that's the way it probably was for the Philistines and for the Israelites. The Philistines thought the Israelites were, well, nothing more than hillbillies. Because for one thing, the Bible tells us that there were no smiths in the land of Israel. And so the Israelites couldn't have swords and spears made for them. They even had to go to the Philistines if they wanted agricultural implements made for them, hoes or mattocks or scythes or plows. The Philistines had to make it, and doubtless the Philistines liked it that way. To use modern economic terms, they maintained a local monopoly over the production of metal, and it was to their advantage both in military and economic terms to keep it that way. So it isn't, I think, exactly as if the Philistines were afraid of the children of Israel. But the children of Israel remembered what they had forgotten in good times, that their only help was from the hand of the Lord, and they called on their judge, Samuel, to pray for them and to sacrifice on their behalf. And as they gathered together in a location called Mizpah, the lords of the Philistines have sent their military, their army, to do the Israelites in. And I doubt very much that they were afraid of the children of Israel lined up there with their hoes and their rakes and a scythe or two. No reason to be afraid. But Samuel sacrificed and made his prayers to God. And God thundered from the heavens, according to the story. And the Philistines ran away in fear. Now, what comes next, we usually tend to clean up with a little moral and good taste hand sanitizer. They did the Philistines in. They killed them. In The Message, Eugene Peterson's magnificent paraphrase of the scriptures, he's quite blunt about it. He says, the children of Israel killed the Philistines right and left. And so it was. Until they got tired of chasing, they got tired of the killing, and they stopped. And at that point, Samuel raised a stone. And this single standing stone was given a name, Ebenezer, the stone of help. Thus far, to this point, God has helped us. Ebenezer, the stone of help. Now, biblical scholars say this could mean one of two things. It could mean, to this point in time, God has helped us. Or it could mean, to this point in space, God has helped us. Maybe we don't actually have to choose between them. Maybe it actually can mean both at the same time. To this point, God has helped us. So far, thus far, God has helped us. That point is Ebenezer, the stone in help, the stone of help. But let's think for a minute about the first possibility, that it's to this point in time. God has helped us to this point in time. We're thinking about indeed an Ebenezer moment, an Ebenezer time. Now, this is a difficult time for us. It's an anxious time. And in the autumn of 2020, it seems to be getting worse again. And there are many, many reasons to be afraid and to be anxious, to be just as afraid as the Israelites were of the Philistines. After all, the virus is a more dangerous enemy than merely refugees from the island of Crete, the Philistines. It's reasonable to be afraid. And we can become prisoners of our fear and prisoners of our worry. But maybe it helps to remember that to this point, God has helped us. That the present is not just a time of anxiety, it's an Ebenezer moment also. Perhaps that's worth remembering now. There's an old hymn with the memorable line in it that they've cleaned up because nobody understands it anymore. Here I raise mine Ebenezer, here by God's great help I've come. Maybe it makes sense to raise an Ebenezer right now. Now, you don't actually have to use stones to do this. Now, if we raise a stone, it wouldn't be one large standing stone, as it was with the children of Israel. We would probably have, well, something like what was placed on the driveway at the end of my son's home, a pile of stones that remind us of the good that the Lord has done for us, that the Lord has helped us in so many different ways to this point. So think about them. The Lord has helped me in this way, and the Lord has helped me in that way, and the Lord has helped us in this other way, and name them. Name them aloud if you have a moment of privacy. Raise the stones of memory of what God has done. Or if you're a parent or a grandparent and the children come over this afternoon, wouldn't it be good to draw a cairn, a pile of stones, and with them name the good things that have happened in your life, the way the Lord has helped you. Hither by God's great help, you've come. And let me tell you this, while you're naming those stones, when you're remembering what God has done for you, it's almost impossible to worry and to be anxious. Raise an Ebenezer this afternoon. Or maybe if you have a garden, or you have a cottage, or have access to some place that's special to you, collect some stones, name them, and pile them, and raise an Ebenezer. Patty and I are doing that this difficult year, remembering what God has done. And when we add a stone, it's an Ebenezer moment. But maybe it's the other way. Maybe it's to this place in time. Not this place in time, but this place in space that God has helped us. Well, that's a little more problematic. And maybe you don't want to imitate an old Bible story about an ancient victory in which one side slaughtered the other, and that's fine. I can understand that thoroughly. But it would be worth remembering that Ebenezer is the place where the killing stopped, where the violence ended. To this point in space, there was violence, there was killing, there was hatred. And at last, the people grew tired of all that violence and hatred, and they stopped. And Ebenezer marks the spot. Well, these are hard times. But maybe we've actually learned something. Maybe things really have changed, or at least can change. Maybe. I tell you one thing. This COVID virus, it isn't a China virus. It isn't a Wuhan virus. It's a human virus. And it affects people the same way. And when Brazilians, or Chinese, or Iranians, or Americans, or Canadians lose a loved one to the virus, they grieve, they feel pain the same way. It has reminded us that we are in fact all one as children of God. And maybe we don't need to add more hatred. Maybe we don't need to add more contempt. We don't need to add the kind of violence and even the killing that springs from hatred and contempt to the suffering that's already there in the world. Maybe it's time to stop all that. And the Ebenezer moment, the Ebenezer place, is the stone of help where God has helped us to do just that, to stop the violence, to stop the killing, to stop the hatred. Could that happen? Could it happen? It would be amazing and wonderful. It would be a miracle. But you know, there is another story in the Bible with a stone. The story took place on a Sunday morning, early in the dawning of the day, long ago, in a garden outside the city of Jerusalem, when a group of women went to anoint and to clean and to prepare the body of the one whom they had loved, of Jesus. And as they walked, they knew that they had a problem. And they said to one another, "Who will roll away the stone from the tomb?" They needed help. And when they got there, the help had come. The stone had been rolled away, and the tomb was empty. You just never quite know what God can do, even about stones. And to God alone be all the glory.